Welcome to the Marvelous Designer Basic Garment Creation tutorial series. In this tutorial, we will be turning a basic block t-shirt into a shirred dress. If you do not have a t-shirt that already fits your avatar, you can use the modular configurator t-shirts, but you will have to do more manipulation than I will be showing here. For those using Marvelous Designer 9.5 and above, we have grouped more tools together for a cleaner user interface. Please long press the left mouse button on the tool to view a list of all of the tools in the tool group. To make it easier to follow along with the lesson, please reset your user settings or make sure your mouse presets are on the 3-button or regular mouse. If you do not know how to change your settings, please watch our UI video first. Before we get started, I'm going to quickly touch on turning gravity off, freeze, and deactivation and their differences. So first of all, I've made 3 pattern pieces, and I'm going to turn gravity off by right-clicking in the 3D window, going to Simulation Properties, going to the Property Editor, and making gravity instead of -9800, I'm making it 0. So if I simulate, my pattern pieces don't move, unless I move them. Next, we are going to be turning one of these pattern pieces to be frozen, so I'm going to zoom in. Right-click, you can do this in the 2D or the 3D window, and you can choose Freeze or hit Control-K. And then, right-clicking, you can also choose Deactivate. And there's 2 different types of deactivation. There's deactivating the pattern and pattern and sewing. So I'm just going to do pattern only for now. And here is what happens and the difference. So if you deactivate your pattern, it is treated like in the simulation that it is not there. So I can pass through it, and it will not be calculated in the actual algorithm. And if it's frozen, it is treated as if it's frozen. It won't simulate, but it will still be treated like a solid object. Now, if I want to sew something, let me reactivate this, right-click, activate, and if I say want to sew just an edge to itself, and I just right-click and deactivate pattern only and simulate, the pattern is deactivated, but the sewing relationship is not. So we're going to be using this in this next tutorial so that I don't have to worry about the algorithm having to calculate any pattern pieces I deactivate, even if I still have the sewing in place. So it makes it a lot faster to simulate and work. So to begin, I am using my own pattern that I drafted for my avatar. If you want to learn how to draft your own, please see our previous tutorial in the introduction series on how to do that. So I will be going to File, Open, and Garment, and I made for myself 2 different ones. One of them is merged across the center line in the front and back, and one of them doesn't have that merge and it has symmetrically linked pattern pieces, so there's 2 front pattern pieces and 2 front back pieces. I'm choosing the one with the 2 pieces per side and selecting Open. And then I'm going to be bringing my avatar in that fits this shirt, which is under my avatar in the library, and it's the female bee that comes with Marvelous Designer. Double-clicking my female bee avatar and selecting Yes to load the pose and size file. Now that all my pattern pieces are in my workspace, I will be toggling off my 2D textures in the toolbar or using Shift-T. Now that we have our pattern pieces in place, we can start our pattern manipulation. We will be adding a wide waistband, and we're going to turn the lower half of this shirt into the skirt of the dress. So we do want to split or cut our pieces into 2. You have a couple of different ways to do this. You could just use the Line 3D Pattern tool and just draw it on your avatar like this, holding Shift to make a perfectly straight line. Though this will not make a perfectly straight line in the 2D window. As you can see, it has a bit of a curve in the front and the back. And you'll need to do some cleanup. So I'm going to be doing all of this in the 2D window. That is an option if you prefer, or if your side seams don't perfectly match like mine do. So to actually do this, I'm going to use the Add Point or Split Line tool. With this tool, you can left-click once to create a segment point and split that line, or you can right-click any segment line, and it brings up the Split Line tool pop-up window. With this window, you have a yellow and a blue line, or line 1 and line 2, and it shows you the measurements. You can specifically select the exact length of one of your lines, or you can change the ratio as well. You can split the length by a specific measurement and by the number of segments, and you can uniform split them into a specific number of segments as well. But what I want to do is I will be eyeballing it and then selecting a measurement that's close. So we want it to be a little above the waist and a little below the waist. So we're just going to start with above the waist to make this split. So I want it about here. I'm thinking it's going to be about 165. So to do that, I'm right-clicking and I'm just going to select 165, making sure it's my upper line at 165 millimeters. Yours doesn't have to be this. I'm just choosing this number so I can be accurate and have the exact point on both side seams. Because what matters is that they actually match up when they're sewn together. So again, right-clicking and just making that 165, okay. And then going up to my toolbar, I'm going to split them using the internal polygon line tool and just create a straight line. You can hold shift if you want, but you don't have to, and hit enter to finish. Once those lines are created, you can use the edit pattern tool to select them both holding shift and right click and choose cut. Not cut and sew because we will be adding a waistband. And now we have an upper portion for our bodice and a lower portion that will become our skirt. So for the center front, we will not have any changes, but for the center back, we will be adding a cutout and then probably making some adjustments to the skirt. So we only need to merge the center front lines and get that seam out of our way. So right click and choose merge. This works when your patterns are symmetrically linked, or you can always use the edit sewing tool and merge your lines that way. Now that they're merged, it'll be a little bit easier for me when I want to sew. So let's go ahead and before we make our waistband, we do want to finish our manipulations for our bodice and our shirt. So what we're going to do is select and change our side seams, holding shift, right click, and choose delete all curve points. This will make it a little easier later on when we do our pattern manipulation. And then I want to bring out my waist on my bodice just so it matches the underarm segment point. It gives her a little more ease in the actual dress, and it looks a little bit better when it's gathered. Now that that is done, we can move our pattern pieces just by selecting them holding shift and then just moving them down to about her hips. So now we can create our waistband. So what I'm going to do for the waistband is I'm going to measure half of the front. So I'm getting 449.3. I'm going to create my waistband, or at least half of it, by going up to the toolbar, long pressing the polygon tool, and making sure I choose the rectangle tool, but you can always use the S hotkey. Then I'm just going to click once in my workspace and input that number. For me, it was 449.3. For you, it might be something different. Make sure that it matches your pattern, not mine. Now for the height, it's clearly 500 millimeters, it's way too much. Let's see what 150 looks like. I think it's a little wide because I want it to be a little more narrow. I'm going to choose 120. I like this width. It's pretty good for just being a specific waistband. And yours can be different as well. This is just a guide. So now that we have all of our pieces, let's unfold our waistband by choosing right-click Unfold, and then I need to just delete those segment points because we don't need them anymore. And make sure to keep your workspace pretty organized. It's best practice because later on your workspace can be used as your UV map. So let's go ahead and place these on our avatar, going to the display options and turning on arrangement points. I'm choosing the select or move key. You can hit Q or you can hit A, doesn't matter. So go ahead and place your pattern around the arrangement points. I'm just moving my skirt around. Get out of the way. And placing it and moving the lower portions as well. If your waistband is too big for your avatar, or if you can see, let me toggle that off. If you see your waistband overlapping but way too much and you're concerned about any collision issues when you simulate, you can, while it's selected, go down to the property editor and choose offset. And here you can change the offset of that curve. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew my waistband to my bodice and to my skirt portion using the free sewing tool or the M hotkey. Sewing from center back to center front, remembering my order that I'm going and holding shift. And then sewing the center backs to each other. Double check your sewing in the 3D window to make sure that you have sewn the correct pieces to each other. This is fine because this is already overlapped and I haven't actually simulated it yet. Making sure that the rest of your sewing isn't crossed, and then go ahead and simulate using the spacebar or the simulate button. Once it is all in place, we can go ahead and start making our shirring or gathering. To create our gathering, we're going to use internal lines, and so to create them, we're going to use the Edit Pattern tool and select the upper and lower segment lines, right-click, and choose Offset as internal line along a curve. Now with this one, it brings up a pop-up window, and we can choose the number of offsets, the offset by measurement, and distance from the edge. So if we look here, if I create more than one, if I create 3, they're evenly spaced from starting from the center of the pattern going out towards the edges. I do want an odd number, so I have one segment line at her waist. So I'm going to choose 5. And I'm going to make sure they're a straight line. If you have curved lines, they will gradiate, so that's really useful later on. But in this case, we just want them to be straight. So I'm going to select OK. And while everything is still selected, holding Shift, I'm selecting those outer segment lines as well. And I will apply elastic to this by going to the property editor and choosing elastic on. This will apply an 80% ratio of elastic to all of these internal lines, and we can see how this looks. So once you have done this, go ahead and simulate. And it looks pretty good. We just need it to be a little bit more tight on her waist. So we can start by radiating outward. So I'm choosing the center line, and I'm going to choose 55. That's nice and tight up the waist. And then I'm going to do 65 and then 70 on both sides of that line. And then I'm going to simulate them all at once. This looks pretty good. You can always change it if you want, especially if your ratio is not the exact same measurement as mine. So just play with it until it's a gradiating elastic value from the center to the edges. So long as it looks nice, that's all that really matters. Just be aware that they are going to be bigger to smaller to bigger. Once this is done, you can actually check your work because this does look strange. It doesn't look very pretty. If you bring your particle distance down to 5, you can see how it will look when it's finished. And simulate. It looks a lot better now, doesn't it? Now another way to also add a better look is to edit your fold direction of your lines. So I'm selecting all of those lines and I'm turning the fold angle to 360. And you can see here it's a lot more realistic of a wrinkle. Once you've done this and you like how it looks, you can turn off your simulation and you can use deactivate. So right click and you can deactivate your pattern only. This allows you to keep this at 5 particle distance and then you don't need to adjust your pattern any further. And now we can move on to the next steps. So we'll go ahead and make the skirt now. So to make the skirt, we can take a look at it, the fit here. It is clearly too tight on her and it's way too short for a dress. So I'm just using the edit pattern tool, selecting the hem of both, holding shift and then just dragging that downward to about her knees. A little below, it's up to you. And then using the transform pattern tool, we're going to make these a bit wider. It's up to you how you want it to look. Just make it as wide as you want. And because we deactivated just the pattern, not the sewing, we can keep our sewing relationship here at the waist and see how it looks. So it looks like we do want to bring the center back a little bit down or out. Let's see. We want to bring this out. So to do that, we can see that it's coming down. We can actually just add a curve using the edit curvature tool. We just add a curve to the center front using the edit pattern tool, and then add a small curve. This will raise this up and make it a bit straighter, but maybe not that severe. Just a little bit. And if you need to delete your Bezier curve points here, you can just delete with the delete key. There we go. It's going to be pretty small, but it does make a big difference. See how it's straight now? Once you like how the front drapes, we can then move on to the side seams. I do want to add some curve to the side seams. So using the edit curvature tool, I'm just selecting my side seams and just making them curve out. The reason I'm doing this is that this gives this point up here into a square, and it turns this lower point into a square as well. And we can do that with the center back. It just makes it look a little bit better and it sews in it a lot nicer. And it gives the drape on the hip a bit more of a natural look. We can check center back. You can make adjustments here if you want. Feel free to do some changes. Design your skirt how you like, and once you've done that, we can go ahead and create our ruffle on the hem. So to do that, we're going to measure that hem again using the edit pattern tool, holding shift to select a front and back piece, which gets me 563.4. Now for most ruffles, they are going to be wider than the actual circumference of the skirt. A general rule of thumb is to have them be at least 150% the finished length. So I'm just pulling out my calculator and I'm going to input that measurement, 563.4 times 3, 1690.2. Now your measurement probably will be different. So make sure to multiply your half measurement by 3, which gets you 150%. You can always multiply it, make it bigger to have more ruffles and like bigger gathering, or you can make it smaller, but it's best to have it be a little bit bigger than the actual circumference. So going up to the toolbar and choosing the rectangle tool again, selecting once and putting in 1690.2 for mine. Go ahead and put your number in, and then for the width, I'm going to do 50 millimeters because I don't want it to be super long. It's a trim, not a extra layer. Once that is in place, go ahead and use the free sewing tool to sew it into the skirt, but do not simulate yet. And sew it to itself. Now you could just hit simulate or the space bar, but if you do, it will probably collide with your avatar's legs because it is a pretty big slingshot into space. So an easy trick is using the transform pattern tool or the move tool. You can right click your pattern piece and there's superimpose options. We have over, under, and side. So select superimpose side, and this will place it to the side of all of the sewing relationships that you have placed on that piece. And now go ahead and simulate. Now watch what happens if I don't do that. Oh good, it worked this time. Sometimes it will slingshot into the avatar through the leg, and you don't want that. So it's best to work with the superimpose. Now that the skirt is done, let's go ahead and work on the back bodice of our dress. So the back bodice, it looks like we need to shorten the center back a bit, and then we do want to create our cutout. So let's go ahead and start with creating the cutout using the internal polygon line tool. I'm just starting from the center back, using Control to make a curve, and then I am ending it a little bit away from the top because I will be doing an overlap there. Using the Edit Pattern tool, right-clicking and choosing Cut, we'll cut that opening, and then we can delete that piece. Swapping over to the Transform Pattern tool with the A hotkey, now I can see how my cutout is going to look. So we can clearly see that it's too big, and what we need to do is reduce the length of this center back line here. So an easy way to do that in Marvelous Designer is just grab that bottom segment point and lift it up. And we can see here, it's already reducing that length. If it's still baggy, you can always check your pattern. This needs to be curved a little bit anyway to again create that square. So we can use the Edit Curvature tool. Just make it a little curved. Just a little bit. And now you can check your center back. See how it's a lot better? You can always make it tighter, but it will end up making it a little too tight. So just be aware, feel free to play around with it. That's the whole point of this. Once you like how your back looks and lays, we can go ahead and create our little tab, and we will be adding a button. So to create our tab, we will be using the internal polygon tool again. You can, as always, use the Line 3D Pattern tool to just draw it on there. Whichever tool you prefer, feel free to do. I'm going to use this to just make a triangle, hit enter, and I'm turning this center point into a curve point. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, I don't really like how this looks, so I'm just going to make it a little bit prettier. Once I like how it looks, I'm going to create a small line to mark where I'm going to be putting my button, just so I can remember and I can place them both on the same exact location of my pattern. So just selecting center, hitting enter to finish. I just have that line as a reference now. The next tool that we're going to use is the trace tool, which is to the right of the internal line tool, or the I hotkey. we can just drag to select, and I'm choosing right click, trace as pattern. And now this traces that internal polygon and line as a pattern piece. Next, I'm going to use the segment sewing tool and just sew that where I want it to be. I'm putting it on the left side so that my overlap is my left over my right. And in the 3D space, again, we're going to use the select or move tool, or you can just hit the A hotkey, right click that pattern piece and superimpose side. Once it's in place, I always just move it to make sure it's in the right layer. Now I can create my buttonhole and my button and delete that center back sewing relationship. So just using the button tool, I can just put it in the center, and use the buttonhole tool, I can also just put that in the center as well. Now clearly they're too big, so let's go ahead and change the size. Double clicking the button in the object browser, I'm going to turn that to a 10mm button, and changing that buttonhole, double clicking, to a 12mm buttonhole. And then let's go ahead and put our button through the buttonhole, and using the edit sewing tool, I am deleting that center back sewing relationship, and go ahead and simulate with a spacebar and see how that looks. Now it's very triangular right now because my particle distance is at 20. It'll look better in a minute. Another way to make sure that your buttons look realistic is in real sewing, in the real world, your button is going to be to the far edge of your buttonhole. So we can plan for this using the select or move button tool. Just move the buttonhole to the edge, and then moving the button to the edge, and then selecting the buttonhole. We can see, zooming in a little closer, the angle. Let's see one other thing. Turning off simulation. Let's move our button. So we have two things that we need to change on our buttonhole. You can change the style of your buttonhole, or you can rotate your buttonhole to the other side. If your buttonhole is a key buttonhole like this, you want this keyhole portion to be on the side that will have the strain. So if you want to rotate that, you can select your buttonhole in the object browser, double click. If you want to change the style of your buttonhole, you can go to the object browser buttonhole and go to shape, and you can choose a different shape. But if you want to keep this style, all you need to do is rotate the angle of your buttonhole. So I'm just going to rotate it 180 degrees. See how that looks. And my bind position, I'm going to move this little center dot to this edge here. Now normally if I go right, it'll go right, but because I flipped it 180 degrees, it's going to go the opposite direction. So make sure to move it to the opposite direction. Now that those are in place, go ahead and simulate one more time, and it looks a little bit more realistic. Now that that is done, let's go ahead and do some cleanup work and then apply fabric to it. If you are having, let's zoom in on the skirt, issues with your skirt, especially if you have a lot of ruffles on the hem, you can stabilize them by using seam tape in the toolbar. So go ahead and just use the seam tape and click it, and it will apply seam tape to those segment lines. You can make changes to the seam tape by going to the property editor, and seam tape is underneath elastic. You can see the width and you can see the preset. So there's two options of the presets. We have fusible rigid and fusible heavyweight. Fusible rigid is just fine. And if you're having issues with your neckline and your center back, You can also apply the seam tape to those as well. And simulate, and we can see the changes. It just stabilizes them, much like it would in the real world, on a real garment. Now let's do the finishing touches by choosing a fabric. So I'm going to the library, double-clicking fabric, and you can play around. You can kind of drag and drop whichever you want into the workspace, and you can see how it's going to change the drape. I have in mind a piqué personally. I like piqué because it comes in cotton as well. It's slightly stretchy but not super stretchy. Because this looks a lot like a sundress, so I'm going to use piqué on the sundress. So I'm going to apply it to all of my pattern pieces by selecting Control A and choosing the Assign button. And then deleting my other fabrics. Once I have my piqué, I'm double clicking it and I'm going to go ahead down to Material and then Color and choose my color. Thinking like a light, easy on the eyes blue. Okay, so feel free to make changes to your color as you like. Once you have done that, we're going to start stair-stepping our fabric down to a 5 particle distance. And zooming in, you can see the piqué texture. So feel free to play around with fabric, choose whichever one you like, and apply your color. Once you've done that, I'm going to select Control A, turn off simulation, deselect my waistband because it is already at 5, and bring down my particle distance to 5. And then simulate. This will get you the most realistic wrinkles, and so just give it a minute to settle down. But I can show you on the back. That tab shape was a little weird looking, but now we can see that it is a lot better. If your pattern pieces do have a very strange shape that does not match your 2D window, it is probably because your pattern pieces are at a very high particle distance for that size. So don't worry about it. Once your other pattern pieces have settled down, go ahead and right-click your deactivated pattern piece and activate it. Turning off simulation for me. Once it looks how you want it to look and you like the wrinkles, go ahead and save this as a garment. So I'm going to File, Save as Garment, because I don't really need the avatar in place right now. And I'm just going to Finish Garments, and I'm going to save this as Shirred Dress. And I'm selecting Save. And that is it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and follow the links here to the next lessons. If you liked this video, hit the like button below and subscribe for more. If you have any questions about getting started in Marvelous Designer or this lesson, please leave a comment below and we will do our best to answer your questions. If you want more information on Marvelous Designer, check out our website, forum, and official Discord channels, which are all linked in the description box below.